Good evening. It's Happy Monday. This is Dr. McDaniel, and I'm streaming really late today. We had a storm yesterday evening, and a lot of the trees came down. The lines fell. One of the train stations at the stop just ahead of mine, the lines were compromised, so they blocked all of the entire track. So that entire line was closed down. So I had some difficulty getting in this morning. I had to get a ride in, and I think a lot of patients who were compromised by the New Jersey line rescheduled or canceled. We had an unusually light morning, which I'm not complaining. I have a lot of work to do always, so I got work done. But then coming home, I had to take just the train as soon as possible because I didn't know if there was going to be an issue with the lines closing back down, and once the rush hour's over, the train's not running anymore. So I just ran home as soon as our office hours were over last night. So now, time settled and everything, it's late. But today I had a special request. I received a question about vaginal infections after the menstrual cycle. So I promised the lady that I would address that this evening in the live stream. I thought about it for a little bit, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a two-parter. So the question I received was, why does she have yeast infections every single month after her cycle? And I thought first, I get that question a lot. Usually the person will ask, why do they get infections every month before their cycle? And then why do they get infections every month after their cycle? What can be done to prevent it, or to alleviate it, or to modify the issue? And the first thing I'd like to say is everyone always just says yeast infections. That's air quotes, yeast infections to me. And the reality is a lot of the time these aren't yeast infections. We call them vaginitis. So vaginitis is just a general broad term for changes in the vaginal environment that I have to plug my phone in for whatever reason. Oops, it is starting. It's on low cell. I forgot to plug it in. So changes in the vaginal environment that are not normal. So vaginity is a generic term. It's kind of like Kleenex for tissue, facial tissue. So instead of saying facial tissue, you just say Kleenex because it's a brand. So it's the same thing with the vaginal infection. A lot of people say yeast, but they're not all yeast infections. Basically, the vaginal environment and the intestinal environment are very similar. They're the only places in our bodies where there are supposed to be bacteria, yeast elements, fungal elements. We call them clean contaminated areas. They're clean because those flora, that those microorganisms are supposed to be there, but they're contaminated because they're bugs, bacteria, germs. And our entire body is sterile except for the intestinal area and the vaginal area. So the intestinal being from the mouth to the stomach, through the small intestines, large intestines, and through the rectum and the anus, so from mouth to bottom, and the vaginal system, which is kind of part of the bottom. So only those areas in the body are not sterile. Everywhere else in the body is sterile. And when there is a disruption in the natural habitat, or the flora in that particular area, be it vaginal or intestinal, most people will have symptoms, will have issues. So if people have a lot of disruption in their intestinal system, they'll have problems like gas, bloating, constipation, loose stools, diarrhea. So irritable bowel syndrome type of issues are predominantly from a disruption or an imbalance of the natural flora that's supposed to be there. Same way with the vaginal system. If there's a disruption of the bacterial levels that are supposed to be there, or the types of bacteria that are supposed to be there, or a disruption or an influx of new bacterial streams or yeast fungal elements, there will be symptoms. There'll either be a discharge, or leukorrhea is what we call that, or there'll be an odor or an itch or irritation, discomfort, rash, swelling, burning. So when there's a disruption in the environment and it gets to a high enough concentration or a big enough issue, there will be symptoms that ensue. Now, as far as the vaginal environment is concerned, a yeast infection is from an overgrowth of yeast elements, which are a form of fungi. So kind of like if someone has athlete's foot or a jock itch, those are fungal infections because of the environment they're on and the type of skin they're on. If you take those to the vaginal system or to the intestinal system or the mouth, we call those yeast infections because that same type of flora changes its form. So it's kind of like a Clark Kent versus Superman. Same guy, but he's in a different form. If you have a vaginal infection or symptoms, it's only going to be from one of 4 different scenarios. It's either going to be from imbalance, overgrowth, or abnormal distribution of bacterial elements, which are germs, microbes, bugs, basically, or from yeast, which I explained, or from a combination of the two, or from a sexual infection. So that's pretty much the only variations you can get. You can get different variations on theme, but the same theme, or all 3, I suppose. Yeast, bacterial, and sexual infection. I've seen that too. The only question is what strain of bacteria is causing the issue, what strain of yeast are causing the issues, and the distribution or the balance of the two. Now, just because someone has an overgrowth or an imbalance doesn't mean they have an infection. Medically, we don't call it an infection unless you have an imbalance, you're having symptoms from the imbalance, and you're bothered by those symptoms. If you take out say you have an imbalance, you're having symptoms, and you're not bothered, then we don't call it an infection. So an infection means you have all of that and it's bothering you. If it's not bothering you, you don't need to do anything. Yeast, fungal, bacterial imbalances, infections, those are not health issues. The only one that could potentially be a health issue is a sexual infection. So chlamydia, gonorrhea, trichomonas, those are the vaginal sexual infections. Those can cause health issues. So those are the only ones that really should be treated if they're detected and you don't have symptoms. The other ones you don't need to treat if you're not having symptoms. Now, everyone calls everything a yeast infection, and not everything is a yeast infection, as I just explained. Predominantly, if someone has a bacterial infections you can get from a contaminant. So say that's where people say, oh, I think I wiped from back to front, I got bacteria. That could happen. Or if you wear a lot of tight-fitting clothing or thong underwear, because of the friction, that will get skin, intestinal bacteria rubbed into the vaginal arena, and given the right environment, it can set up shop and cause an infection. That happens sometimes also if someone has frequent stools, loose stools, or diarrhea. They have just a high concentration of bacteria from the intestinal system in the environment. It will often cause an imbalance infection. If someone's sexually active and perhaps with the friction that rubbed intestinal or skin or surrounding area into the vaginal arena, or even pH imbalances. So bacteria likes a high pH, and the vaginal system is a low pH. It should be acidic. So the vagina should be acidic. It should be between 3.5 and 4.5 pH. Water is 7, blood is 7, and bacteria like 7 or higher. So certain bacteria that are supposed to be in the vagina, they're good with a low pH. Once you start increasing that pH, you'll increase the bacteria that aren't really supposed to be there, and you will potentially cause an imbalance, an overgrowth, and have symptoms from an infection. So in light of that, anything that can cause a pH imbalance or that can compromise your immune system will cause an imbalance. So bacteria likes a high pH, blood has a high pH, lubricants have a high pH, and semen has a high pH. So all of those environmental factors can increase the vaginal pH. Anything that can stress the immune system can also cause a pH imbalance, and can increase bacterial elements. So good stress, bad stress, change in activities, those can all increase vaginal pH and can cause issues. Yeast lives at a low pH, so yeast likes an acidic environment. So anything that can cause an imbalance in the environment, but at the same time maintain an acidic or low pH, will cause a yeast overgrowth. So good stress, bad stress, sometimes change in compromising the immune system can do that. Blood usually won't do that because blood raises the pH. It doesn't maintain a low. Semen won't do it, and lubricants won't do it. Most lubricants are water-based, so they have a high pH. Some of the silicone-based ones don't. So more often than not, if someone has an imbalance or an infection issue after their cycle, it's most commonly going to be bacteria. It will sometimes be a combination. If you had a ton of yeast in the vaginal vault, the cycle, because of the low pH, or the high pH of the blood, wiped out a lot of that yeast, because yeast does not like to live in a high pH. You may still have some afterwards. So if you had a high amount before, maybe after the cycle you have symptoms, and it's because you either have bacteria or you have bacteria and yeast elements present. Before the cycle, it's more common. If someone has issues or symptoms, more common than often, it'll be yeast, and then that will drop after the cycle. So that's kind of the preface to separate the different types of infections. And it's getting late, so I'm going to stop the live stream for tonight. I will pick up on it again tomorrow, and tomorrow I will go over different signs and symptoms. So things you can see or notice, observe, and things you would feel, see, or smell that would indicate certain types of infections, be they yeast, fungal, bacterial, combination, or other, and different ways to treat on your own. And then tomorrow's Tuesday, Wednesday night, different ways to prevent imbalances. So I'm sorry I couldn't do this all in one live stream, or it'll be like a 30-45 minute live stream, which is not going to work well. So I'll just do that amount as kind of a background basis, a preface tonight. And tomorrow I will do the second part, and then Wednesday I'll do the third part. I'm not going to go into, since this was all medical, completely all medical, I won't do any patient examples tonight because it's so late. I'll try and add one tomorrow, and based on some patients we saw today or tomorrow, depending on the diversity. So we have a lot. I was going to do a presentation on a patient who came in for an ultrasound or a sonogram today, but I will put that off to another night because it's getting late. So thank you for joining me. This is Gyn Corner. This is Dr. McDaniel. My office is in Midtown Manhattan, 225 West 35th Street. On 35th Street between 7th and 8th Avenue we're located. If you're in the area, come on in. I'll be happy to see anyone who's watching the live stream since this is new. And thank you for your attention. Have a good night. Bye.